What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? Matty P here with another episode of Steelers Touching Under. Today we're looking at KP8, Kenny Pickett. Did Kenny Pickett do anything good in 2023? I mean, we're hearing a lot of criticism. We're hearing a lot of people say he's not the guy. We've heard a lot last couple of weeks around Justin Fields. We've heard about them potentially, trading for some other quarterback, picking up a quarterback in free agency. You've heard of them drafting a quarterback. I've heard names like JJ McCarthy thrown around at number 20. Maybe they go get a Michael Penix Jr. if he falls. Do they go get a mid-round guy? That can happen regardless of what they do, regardless of what they think of Kenny Pickett. Do they sign Mason Rudolph? If they sign Mason Rudolph, is he the starter? And then he and Kenny, or is it him and Kenny Pickett battling out in camp? There are all these different scenarios. But what did he do in 2023? Now, a lot of people say, you look at the tape, he didn't show enough. I look at the tape and I see him a winner. I see a guy who was playing in one of the worst offensive schemes in the league. So with that, all that being said, how did he actually perform? And how did he perform against the NFL leaders? How did he perform against his fellow draft mates from the 2022 draft class? That's what we're going to unpack on this episode and all more. I'm also going to try and keep this as brief as I can. There are going to be a lot of stats that we're going to talk through, but it's all with the mind of viewing, did Kenny Pickett do anything right? Because a lot of people out there treat it like Kenny Pickett is the devil. He's he might be a nice guy off the field, but on the field, he's one of the worst things to ever happen to the Pittsburgh Steelers. That can't be true because his name isn't Devin Bush or Artie Burns. He's a better first round pick than that. So let's look into what he did right, what he did wrong, and where those areas that the Steelers could latch onto, I guess, if they are keen on bringing Kenny Pickett forward. This video is not going to change your mind potentially if you hate Kenny Pickett. If you love Kenny Pickett, it's probably not going to change your mind either. But at least it might make you a bit more open to either scenario, whether he goes, whether he stays, whether they keep him starter, whether he's the backup, all those things and more. All right, so let's start off with Kenny Pickett's personal stats specifically. Now, Kenny Pickett this year had a QB record of 7-5. Last year, he also had a record of 7-5. This year, he started 12 games and played in those 12 games, same as last year. Obviously, in both years, there were games where he did not finish them. He started them, did not finish them. He had 7 touchdowns and 9 interceptions in 2022. Most people know that stat. He also had 3 rushing touchdowns that year, so that's a bit of a difference maker in that if you actually look at that, particularly where how some of those were so close to the line, to the end zone, I kind of treat it as 10-9. Anyway, this year, 6 TDs, 4 interceptions. Interception percentage went from 1.8%, actually went up a tick to 1.9. But that looks in terms of all the completions that he had and versus the attempts and in the games. Now, his percentage went back 1%, 63 to 62%. And we'll balance these into what happened with the rest of the league as well. First downs, he had less first downs by about 30. But he played less snaps. I think he had a couple hundred less snaps. We can look at the snap count there. Yeah, he had 670 snaps versus 804 snaps. So Kenny Pickett played less. These were the percentage. Yards per attempt went up to 6.4. He had a long pass of 72. They were both gains in both areas. His quarterback rating was 81.4. That was not the worst in the league by far in terms of starting quarterbacks. He was sacked 23 times. That was a bit of improvement on the 27 from the previous year. He had 3 fourth quarter comebacks again, 3 game-winning drives. He had 4 in his rookie year. People should say, well, then he shouldn't be coming back if you're in scores all the time, but that relies on a lot more than just him. Sack percentage kind of staying the same. So he had pretty much the same as last year. We didn't see it. Fans walked away going, he's not the guy, purely because there was no leap taken. But Canada's offense, I think, got worse a year in. I think it was actually worse than what we saw in 2022. I think in 2023, it was much worse on 2022. But Kenny Pickett, up until this point, 24 games started, played in 25 games, 14-10 record, right? That's what it is. So what does that equate to for the rest of the league? Now, if you look at the winning records from last season across all quarterbacks that started, Mason Rudolph is the best in the league with 3, right? He played in 4 games, started 3, obviously played in that Colts game, but it's starting quarterback, Mason Rudolph, best record in the league. That's right. Mason Rudolph, MVP. Here we go. Right? But if you look at it, actually, and you go down the list, Kenny Pickett was 7-5. at number 19. Matt Stafford, 9-6 at 18. CJ Stroud, 17th with 9-6. Patrick Mahomes, 16th with 10-6. Like, you got the list, Josh Allen, what have you. You can work your way up the list. But of guys that played, like, more than 10 games, Kenny Pickett's not that far down the list, right? Kenny Pickett's in the top 5 to 10 guys when you look at people that have played more than, started more than 10 games, right? Huge. So that's kind of, I can't balance them both the table against that. So that was kind of interesting. I then think about the percent, so you didn't do everything wrong there. Then I look at the percentage in terms of his completion. He was 28th in the league. Fields was worse. Zach Wilson was worse. Bryce Young was worse. Will Levis was worse, right? In terms of starting QBs. And those guys have played the most amount of games and snaps at their position starting quarterback for their team, right? 28th. Could be worse. And he played in the worst offense overall in terms of Matt Canada's scheme. Yards, again, not the worst. 29. Not the worst. 29. TDs, yeah, he was right down the bottom of this list. He was 37th. That's less than guys that weren't the starting quarterback. So that kind of sucks, right? That is what it is. You look at the interception percentage, though, again, very, very low when you look at the interception percentage for Kenny Pickett. That's right. Second in the league. Second best in the league. CJ Stroud only one better. Now, CJ Stroud obviously a lot better, and some of these guys with Justin Herbert and Jackson and Derek Carr and Dak Prescott, they played more games than Kenny Pickett, so they were throwing more. So for the fact that they threw what they threw was pretty good. There's a lot of guys in that 1.5% bucket, but he didn't turn the ball over. So we hate about Trubisky. When you got the run game, you got the Steelers defense. This is really important, and he did that really well. And if you think about Mike Tomlin and low margin football and the way Mike Tomlin likes to play football, and maybe that's your criticism of Mike Tomlin, this is pretty good, right? 1.2%. You can't ask much better than that, right? What do we want? 0.5%? So I think he did that pretty right as well. You then look at interceptions overall. There are a lot of guys who have 0, obviously, in terms of all of this. But you look at guys that played like a lot of games. Sam Darnold had 1. I can't believe that that's the case. They played in 10 games and they started 1. So let's go off the started mark. In terms of that started, Kenny Pickett there. I said he got the 4 interceptions. Josh Job had 10 interceptions. He started a similar amount of games. You look at Zach Wilson. He had 7 interceptions. You look at Minshew, who had started 13 games, had 9 interceptions. Fields had 9 interceptions. Now, yes, those guys scored more TDs. I totally get it. Riddle was 12-12. So I just look at a couple of these things, and then let's go to quarterback rating, for example. You look at quarterback rating, Kenny Pickett, 27th in the league. It could be worse, right? It really could be worse. We talked about sacks before. There's no equating that. That's more talking about offensive line. So it wasn't. And then we look, actually, I want to look at one more thing. Yards per game, 30th. Now, Steelers running offense was what got going. The best game, Kenny Pickett had his best game against the Bengals, and he was starting to play well against the Cardinals. It was 7 for 10, I think, for 72 yards, something. Then he hurt himself. I thought he was on a track to have a 250-yard game. He looked really good that day, right, before that injury. Right, they pretty much ended the season for him. Even when he came back, obviously Mason Rudolph started, right? But it wasn't terrible. And again, it's ahead of Ryan Tannehill, ahead of Bailey Zappi, ahead of a bunch of other blokes as well. So was 30th, could have been worse. That's all I'm saying. Could have been worse. Look at fourth quarter comebacks, up there, 5th in the league. Look at game-winning drives, 6th in the league. That's pretty good. Now, obviously, we want to see more production. So we want to see more yards, more touchdowns. Actually, yeah, that's what I wanted to look at yards as well. Yards I want to say for you, 29th. Could have been worse. He could have been Jake Browning. Could have been Will Levis. In the end, could have been Kyler Murray. Those guys played a few less games than Pickett. Mac Jones had more yards and he played one less game. He started one less game than Pickett. But it's not the worst. And he didn't have necessarily, I think, the rushing offense that the Steelers had. So, again, Kenny Pickett, it's not a complete fail. He's not the worst starting quarterback in every statistical category. So then I thought, let's compare it to his 2022 draft teammates. And let's see how they've gone in their careers to date. So I said when he did in 2023 was he the worst. But let's look at over the course of their careers to date. So we're looking at Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, Desmond Ridder, Sam Howell, Brock Purdy, Bailey Zappi. Now, there are a few other guys taking, guys like Matt Corral in that draft. There are a few other, I think there's maybe one other quarterback taken. But ultimately, still took Oladokun. But ultimately, Kenny Pickett and Brock Purdy have played the most amount of games, right? Now, Brock Purdy has played on a much better team than Kenny Pickett has, Much better team than Kenny Pickett does. Let's be straight on that. Much better setup. If you take Brock Purdy out of this list, Kenny Pickett has the best winning record here. Bailey Zappi's 4-4. Kenny Pickett's 4-10. Malik Willis is 1-2. Desmond Ridder's 8-9. And Sam Howell's 5-13. Right? And think about how far the Steelers are from the San Francisco 49ers in terms of their team. You look at completion percentage. The worst out of these blokes is Malik Willis, who everyone wanted them Steelers to draft instead of Malik Willis. Right? It's 62.6 for Kenny Pickett career completion percentage to date. Sam Howell 63.2%, 0.6 difference. Desmond Ridder is 6.64%, 1.4 difference. Bailey Zappi is 63.2%, 0.6% difference. They're pretty much all the same. Brock Purdy's ahead, but again, who is he throwing it to? He's throwing behind the best O-line out of all of these guys. You've got to take that into equation. Whereas Kenny Pickett's got Mason Cole throwing the balls at his legs. Kendrick Green was doing the same thing. You got Dan Moore letting anyone go to him whenever they want. You've had turnstiles on the interior apart from James Daniels, and James Daniels hasn't played. I don't think he's played up to what some Steelers fans think he's played to. He had a better year this year than the previous year, I think. But he started off slow. The first 4 to 6 games were crap. So you really think about it, and then Okorafor has not played particularly well either. We saw that being the reason. So like Kenny Pickett's not had the line there, right? Like you can say that about anyone, fine, but he's not. You look at then overall yards. Brock Purdy, number 1 with 5,600 yards. Again, look at who he's throwing to, guys, yak yardage, all the rest of it. You look at Sam Howell, probably closest, I think, in terms of, in terms of how much he's played and what he's done in those games. 4,115 yards. Kenny Pickett's got 4,474 yards. Desmond Ridder's got 3,544. Bailey Zappi's played a lot less games, right? Pass yards per attempt. Yes, Kenny Pickett is the second lowest on this list, but pretty close to 6.8 in Bailey Zappi. Sam Howell 6.5, I should say. Sorry, a lot of sixes. Desmond Ridder 7. So that will kind of equate to each other. You look at passing TDs though, over the course of their career, 13 for Kenny Pickett, 14 for Desmond Ridder. Sam Howell's got 22. And Bailey Zappi's got 11. Now, obviously, Brock Purdy's got 44. Again, look at the offense he's playing in. This doesn't count playoffs, by the way. Interceptions. Bailey Zappi's the lowest. Desmond Ridder's about there as well. Sorry, Malik Willis is the lowest, but he's played a lot less games. Sam Howell, 22. Kenny Pickett's only thrown 13, right? Kenny Pickett might be 13. Sam Howell's 22 and 22. The best, obviously, here is Brock Purdy, right? Like, I almost didn't put him in the list, but people would have said, oh, well, he was drafted in the same draft. So that's why I did, right? But you look at this Bailey Zappi, 11 TDs, 12 interceptions. You look at Desmond Ridder, as I said, 14 TDs, 12 interceptions. There's not a lot of difference here. Career quarterback rating, 79 for Sam Howell, 78.8 for Kenny Pickett. Basically the same. Desmond Ridder slightly ahead, and Bailey Zappi's behind both blokes, right? Rush attempts, Kenny Pickett's had the most. You don't really count that one. But you look at it in terms of rush yards. Kenny Pickett, the second best with 291. Sam Howell, 298. Right? They're not paid to rush. I can understand that. But Kenny Pickett's third on this list in terms of rushing TDs with 4. Desmond Ridder 5. Sam Howell 6. Right? So these things aren't that different. As I said, we talked about completion percentage. We talked about interceptions. Kenny Pickett being middle of the pack of these guys. You look at sacks, though. Kenny Pickett's been sacked the second most amount of times, right? Brock Purdy with 39. Malik Willis has played the least amount of games, and so has Bailey Zappi. So if you look at the proper 4 starting quarterbacks that we're really talking about here, in Purdy, Ridder, and Pickett and Howell, Pickett's been sacked the second most amount of times, right? Fair enough. Now, you look at overall in terms of we'll start looking at yards per attempt. As I said, we talked about that before. Kenny Pickett's way down this list, and that shows the problem with the offense. You look at yards per completion, again, pretty low there, but there's 4 guys here in the 10 yards. Brock Purdy obviously has the most. He's got a bunch of weapons here that are yak yard machines. Desmond Ridder, 11. There's literally 1 yard separating 5 of these guys. And you might say to me, hey, Matt, none of these guys are starting QBs outside of Purdy. Fine. But the Steelers had to draft a quarterback pretty much, and this was the draft class, right? This was the draft class. You look at we'll just go through a couple of other key stats. Bad throw percentage. Kenny Pickett, the second most. This is where I think he definitely needs to improve, right? Definitely needs to improve. 18.3%. You look at the drop percentage, though, on his passes, and 4% of his passes are dropped. Sam Howell's 4.5%. Malik Willis at 6.8%. Now, Malik Willis, again, played the lowest amount of games. But Brock Purdy, 3.7%. It's not a great, huge amount of difference there, right? It really isn't. But you look at throwaways. Kenny Pickett and Sam Howell throwing the ball away a lot. They're not behind great lines. Brock Purdy's throwing it almost away half the amount of times that these two blokes have. And think about the line that Purdy plays behind. And think about the people that he gets to play with. He gets to pass to as well, right? That's pretty huge. Okay, so you then look at yards per scramble attempt as well. There's guys scrambling around for their life, and Howell and Zappy and Purdy. Even Purdy there, but Pickett a little bit less than Purdy, which I kind of found interesting. But Purdy's got an ability to extend plays, and he's got the weapons for him to extend plays. Kenny Pickett's throwing it to like Deontay Pickens, who's he's technically a rookie developing like that. That's a big difference. You look at the pressure percentage per game, take Malik Willis out of the equation. He's played only 11 games, only started in 3. Kenny Pickett's been pressured the most amount of times. Ritter the least. So Ritter's stats are actually worse than Kenny Pickett, I think, because he's had a lot of other benefits across the board, and his stats aren't that much better. We're talking the difference at 2 touchdowns, right? From a passing perspective. You look at overall in terms of snap counts as well, who's played the most. Kenny Pickett has played technically more than Brock Purdy, which I did kind of find interesting in that regard. So he's had the most chance to make something happen. And yeah, this is an area that I think he needs to develop. I'm not saying that he's a great quarterback. I'm not saying he's the next Steeler great quarterback. I'm just saying that his stats the worst in the league. I think he gets the rap that he's the worst in the league, and that's not actually the case, right? So that was the point in terms of doing it. If you look at pass yards after catch, right, the yak yardage of all their players, Sam Howell and Kenny Pickett are pretty level, but Purdy has way more, and that's a big difference here. I was surprised at how little Desmond Ridder had, so that does sort of go against him in terms of it makes his stats a little bit worse than what they could be. So you could say he's got more potential as well. But it is kind of an interesting landscape here because take Brock Purdy out. Kenny Pickett's pretty similar to Howell and Ridder and all these blokes, but he's got a much better record. Why? Because he turns the ball over the least with 1.2% in this previous year. An interception rate overall of 1.8%, right? That is the lowest amongst this group. Ridder and Purdy, more. Howell, more. Howell, 3.5%. Purdy and Ridder, 2.4%. But because Kenny Pickett doesn't turn the ball over with the Steelers' defense and the Steelers' running backs and what they can do, and they were playing in the crappiest offensive scheme where he would have had every right probably to throw more interceptions, they were able to win games. So we all complain about Kenny Pickett being a game manager. The guy's 14-10. You can only win games you're playing. Right now, 14-10 doesn't sound as good as 7-5, but 14-10 is nothing to shirk at. It's not a losing record, right? It's not a losing record. If we go up to these guys, Sam Howell, 5-13, Desmond Ridder, 8-9. Like, it's yes, they've played 6 to 7 games less than Kenny Pickett, but their record is pretty bad, right? Pretty bad. And you think about a proper offensive scheme, yeah, 17-4 might be a stretch with what Brock Purdy's got. But could it be like 16-9? Quite possibly, right? Kenny Pickett started the Cardinals game. If he'd finished it, they probably would have won that game, right? So these are some of the things that I think Steelers fans that are out on Kenny Pickett have a think about Kenny Pickett in an Arthur Smith offense that favors the weapons of what the Steelers do. Think about Kenny Pickett in an upgraded offensive line where the center doesn't throw it at his feet. Think about Kenny Pickett, or not just a center. You think about Dan Moore actually being a backup, not a starter like he deserves to be. Another weapon at wide receiver or tight end. Huge for this team because we didn't even have a proper third wide receiver when you think about Allen Robinson. Not that he couldn't play for football. He's just kind of past it, right? Calvin Austin, Matt Canada didn't know how to use him. Tight end, Pat Freeman's either injured, so he's without his big target, and we saw what happened when he came back in that Bengals game. So before you write Kenny Pickett off, or you write the Steelers and their strategy off about Kenny Pickett being the starter this next year, there are stats that prove he is not the worst quarterback in the league. And in fact, he's better at some things than guys that the Steelers have been linked to. Guys like, the guys like Tannehill, guys like Justin Fields. He has been better than those guys. So when you think about it, like, it's not the worst thing to run it back with Kenny Pickett. Yes, do I think he's going to prove it year? 100% I do. Do I think he's got to make a massive leap this year? 100% I do. No way, shape, or form am I going to argue with that whatsoever. But for the Steelers, it's not the worst strategy, and you did invest a first-round draft pick in it. And there's a lot of people out there that hate Kenny Pickett, and then there's a lot of those same people are like, the Steelers should tank for a high draft pick. So what do you want to do? Worst case, they do suck this year. Worst case, you do have a top draft pick in 2025, and you can go out and draft a guy. Yeah, the quarterbacks might not be as good, but you can go get Sanders, you can go get Quinn Ewers, you can go get whoever else emerges. Maybe it's Drew Ayla out of Penn State. You can go do all of those things if you really, really want to, right? But like, that's up to you if you have a high draft pick, right? It really, really is. So I think it's kind of interesting in where it sits. Remember, Russell Wilson finished the season at 7-8. Kenny Pickett was 7-5, right? Now, Kenny Pickett played less games, but they were going to win some of the games that he didn't get to play in, right? So I just kind of remind people of this. Yes, Russell Wilson had 26 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, right? Totally. I'm not saying that, he had a good year. I don't know why Denver shouldn't really move on from him except for the issues that he has with the coach. But all I'm saying, basically, Steelers fans, is don't write Kenny Pickett off completely. Don't write the Steelers strategy off of him competing against Mason Rudolph, right? As always, go Steelers.